Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. By the end of that night, the city above me had gone quiet. My name is Miguel Alvarez. I am a track and tunnel maintenance technician for the subway system. On paper, that means I inspect rails, drainage, pump rooms, and power cables. In real life, it means I know every forgotten corner under the city where people rarely go unless something is broken. That night started like every other night shift. It was a little after 10 in the evening. I had signed in at the maintenance office near Fulton Street, grabbed my standard kit, and taken the elevator down to the service corridor. My bag carried what I always carried: a rechargeable headlamp rated at about 800 lumens, a backup hand lamp, insulated gloves, a multimeter, a stainless steel pry bar, a heavy adjustable wrench, lockout tags, and my radio. On my belt, I had my personal multi-tool and a folding knife. I was in orange coveralls with reflective stripes, steel-toe boots, and a hard hat with the company logo scraped and faded from years of use. The city had been tense for weeks. Everyone knew the news about a strange virus spreading in clusters. At first, it sounded like regular flu. Then reports started to sound different. People mentioned sudden aggression, people losing control, people biting strangers in trains and buses. The company had sent us a short safety memo that morning telling us to avoid physical contact with anyone who appeared sick and to call transit police if we saw anything unusual, that was all. The trains kept running, the city kept moving, because that is what cities like this do until they have no choice. My job that night was simple. We had a pump alarm in one of the intermediate sumps between Fulton and Brooklyn. Under the river, the tunnel sits lower than most of the system, and water always finds a way in. There are dozens of sumps and electric pumps that send water to the sewers. If a pump fails, water starts building up. If several fail at the same time, you have a problem that grows faster than most people realize. Control had logged an intermittent fault on Pump Group B in Sump Chamber 47. They wanted someone to do a physical inspection. I had done this run many times. Walk the tunnel on the maintenance walkway, check the pump room, listen to the pumps, check the current draw if power is available, clear debris from strainers. It was always wet, noisy, and boring. I met my partner for the night, Greg Shaw, in the service corridor. He was in his late 50s, close to retirement, with decades underground. He had seen almost every possible failure: fires in cable rooms, power surges, derailments, water main breaks feeding torrents into the tracks. He handed me a rolled-up schematic of the pump layout. "Group B again," he said. "Last week it was just a clog, maybe the same mess." "You staying topside?" I asked, tightening the strap on my hard hat. "I will be at the intermediate electrical room," he said. "They want manual confirmation of the breaker status after you look. Call me on the radio when you are there. If it looks bad, we tag it out and schedule a full shutdown with control. Tonight, we only look." We signed the log, keyed through a steel door, and walked down the narrow service stairs into the tunnel level. The hum of the system surrounded us. The constant vibration of moving trains, the thump of pumps, the roar of ventilation fans moving air through concrete tubes. There is always sound underground. Silence usually means something is very wrong. At the bottom of the stairs, I turned on my headlamp even though the tunnel lighting was still on. Old habits. The headlamp beam crossed the concrete ceiling, the cable trays, the third rail protection board. I checked the third rail indicator lights, green, which meant normal voltage. In this section, the substations fed about 650 volts direct current into the third rail, enough to stop anyone who stepped on it with wet boots and no training. The protection boards and signs were clear. We stepped onto the maintenance walkway that ran along the tunnel wall. The track bed in this section was slab concrete, not ballast. Water pooled along the center drain as always. Small trickles of water stained the walls where seepage came through the lining. Normal. Greg stopped by a gray metal door labeled Electrical Room 12B. This room contained local feeders, breakers, control panels for the pumps, and some signal equipment. "I'll be here," he said. "Keep radio contact every 10 minutes. If you lose contact, you come back. No hero stuff." "Got it," I said. He smirked. "And no swimming lessons this time." I moved on, alone now, following the curve of the tunnel. My radio crackled with the usual chatter. Train movements, control instructions to train operators, a few station calls about minor incidents. Nothing about the virus. Nothing about anything out of the ordinary. The city was still pretending everything was under control. My route would take me along the main tunnel under the river, past Sump Chamber 47, then toward the next station. On the way, I would pass one emergency exit shaft and one cross passage leading to an old, disused tunnel. I pictured the route in my head like a map. Years of walking these spaces had built a mental model in my brain. Every door, every ladder, every piece of equipment had a place. About 5 minutes into the walk, the first sign of trouble came. It was small, but I remember it clearly. My radio cut out mid-sentence. "Control to train 25. Static swallowed the words. Then nothing. Silence. I lifted the radio to my mouth. "Control, this is Maintenance Technician Alvarez in Section River 1. Do you copy?" Nothing. I changed channels to the maintenance group. "Greg, you copy? This is Alvarez." Still nothing, just a faint hiss. I frowned and checked the radio display. The battery indicator was full. The channel setting was correct. Sometimes signal was weak, deep under the river, but we had repeaters installed to cover these sections. Total silence was unusual. The tunnel lights flickered overhead. Once, twice. Then everything went dark. When tunnel lights go out, you feel it in your body. The space seems to close around you. My headlamp cut through the blackness with a bright circle of white, but the sudden transition still made me pause. My first thought was local power fault. Maybe a breaker in electrical room 12B had tripped. But the hum I was used to hearing from ventilation fans faded away too. The low vibration of trains passing in other tubes vanished. The air became still. I turned slowly, sweeping the beam along the track and the curved wall. The third rail indicator lights that had glowed green a minute before were now dead. That meant the traction power was cut. Trains would be coasting to a stop wherever they were. "Greg, do you copy?" I said again into the radio, louder this time. Nothing. I changed to the emergency channel and called control. "This is Maintenance Technician Alvarez in Section River 1. I'm in the main tunnel between Fulton and Brooklyn. We have lost tunnel lighting, ventilation, and traction power. Please confirm." Silence. No control, no trains, no fans, no lights except mine. A few seconds later, from far down the tunnel behind me, I heard a sound that sent a chill through me even before I understood it. It was not loud at first. A deep, low rumble, as if someone was dragging something heavy over concrete. Then a faint rush, like wind, but steady and growing. Water. It took my mind a second to process. The river was outside the tunnel walls, held back by layers of concrete, steel, and older masonry. But water can also come from the city side. Broken water mains, sewer surcharges, storm drains overwhelmed by heavy rain. The last week had seen a lot of rain. Pump Group B had already been flagged. If multiple pumps went offline at once, water would have nowhere to go. I started walking faster toward the sump chamber. The concrete under my boots felt normal at first, just damp. Then I heard the sound change, a shallow splash with every step. I looked down. A thin film of water covered the walkway, flowing in the same direction I was heading, which meant water was entering the tunnel behind me and moving toward the sump. If the pumps were not running, the sump would fill and overflow. From there, water would spread along the lowest parts of the tunnel. I quickened my pace to a jog. My headlamp bounced ahead of me, showing the tunnel curve, the cabling along the wall, the track. I could not hear anything from the radios. The only sounds were my breathing and the growing rush of water in the distance. I reached the steel door to sump chamber 47. It sat slightly recessed into the tunnel wall, with a graded floor section next to it where water normally drained into the sump. Tonight, the drain looked like a small river spilling inward. Water flowed over the grate in a continuous sheet. I keyed the lock, pulled the door open, and stepped inside. The sump chamber was a vertical hollow in the concrete structure. A steel grate platform formed the floor where I stood, with safety railings and a ladder leading down to the lower level where the pump sat. The air was humid and smelled of rust and damp concrete. Normally, the sound of pumps filled the chamber. A steady mechanical hum, plus the rush of water moving through discharge pipes. Tonight, there was only the sound of water entering and no sound of pumps pushing it out. My headlamp beam lit the control panel on the wall. All indicator lights were dark, no power. I moved to the edge of the platform and pointed the lamp downward. The sump was already filling. Dark water rose almost to the lower platform. The tops of the pump casings were still visible, but the intake pipes were fully submerged. I checked my watch. It was about 10:30 in the evening. "Great," I said aloud, because sometimes talking to yourself in a confined space is better than hearing nothing. Citywide power failure, no pumps, water rising. Perfect night. There were manual valves and floodgate controls in deeper sections of the system, but most were not in this particular chamber. This one relied on electric pumps controlled from local panels and backed up by automated signals from the central control system. If the blackout was local, the company had procedures to bring power back quickly. If it was not local, things could get out of hand. I tried the radio again. "Greg, this is Alvarez at Sump 47. We have a power failure and rising water. Do you copy?" All I got was a faint, distorted noise, not words. Just a crackle that sounded more like someone breathing too close to a microphone. I listened for a few seconds. The sound did not repeat. "Control, this is Alvarez. Any station, please respond." I waited. No answer. The headlamp beam dimmed slightly, then brightened again as the automatic regulator adjusted. I checked the battery pack on the back of my helmet. It was fully charged at the start of the shift, but I had learned to never trust electronics when everything else was failing. I weighed my options. I could stay in the sump chamber and wait, but the chamber would eventually flood up to the platform. I could head back the way I came, toward the intermediate electrical room and the service stairs, hoping Greg was there and safe. Or I could keep going toward the next station, which was closer at this point. That station would have emergency exits to the surface and possibly battery-backed emergency lighting. I pictured distances. From where I stood, the next station was roughly 600 meters ahead. The intermediate electrical room was about 300 meters behind me, plus the stairs. The water seemed to be coming from behind, flowing toward the sump. That meant the level behind me might be higher already. I decided to move forward. I stepped out of the sump chamber, closed the door, and continued along the tunnel. The water on the walkway reached my ankles within a few dozen meters. It was cold and pulled at my boots with every step. The headlamp showed the surface moving steadily under the light. In the darkness, my world shrank to the bright circle from my lamp. The overhead cable trays disappeared into blackness beyond the beam. My ears strained for any sound. The distant slosh of deeper water, the creak of metal, anything that might mean a train car shifting or debris floating. After a few minutes, I started seeing reflections ahead, little flashes at the edge of the light bouncing off metal. I slowed, crouched slightly, and aimed the beam forward. A train sat motionless in the tunnel, its leading car blocking most of the view. It was one of the newer models with the stainless steel body and wide doors. The interior was dark, but I could see faint movement through the windows. The train must have been moving when the power cut and had coasted to a stop. I approached carefully along the walkway. The water around the train was slightly deeper, reaching mid-calf. The front of the train stopped just short of the station entrance. I could see the platform edge ahead, lit only by my lamp. I reached the driver's side window and climbed up using the grab handles. The door was closed. I knocked lightly with the wrench. "Hello? This is maintenance. Anyone inside?" Something moved inside the cab. A shadow shifted, then pressed against the glass. My headlamp lit a face inches away from mine on the other side of the window. For a second, my brain tried to fit what I saw into normal categories. Exhausted operator, injured, scared. Then I realized the eyes staring at me did not look right. They were wide open, unfocused, with a strange dullness. The skin was pale, not like simple fear, but like circulation had given up. The mouth moved, but no clear words came, just a low, continuous sound, like a growl forced through clenched teeth. The person threw their weight against the window. The glass shook. I jerked back on instinct, almost slipping on the wet metal step. "Hey, easy," I said, more to myself than to them. The person in the cab slammed their hands against the window again and again. Their movements were jerky, not coordinated. No attempt to open the door, no use of the handle, just repeated impact. The news reports came back to me at once. People losing control, people showing sudden aggression, people trying to bite others. I backed down to the walkway, heart pounding. I had no medical training beyond basic first aid. I was not a police officer. I was alone in a dark tunnel with water rising and no radio contact. My job was to keep the infrastructure alive, not diagnose a strange virus. The person in the cab continued to hammer on the glass. I could see their hands now. The skin across the knuckles looked torn. Dark streaks ran along the inside of the window. I did not want to think about what those streaks were. The sound from inside the train changed. More voices. Not words. Just more of those low sounds layered, echoing off the walls. The headlamp beam picked up movement inside the passenger car behind the cab. Shapes pressing against the doors. Hands hitting windows. Faces turning toward the light. I turned the beam away from the windows. The noise increased when the light hit them, like they were reacting to it. I stepped carefully around the front of the train, staying on the narrow maintenance walkway. The water tugged at my boots, and the sharp smell of metal and something else, sweat, maybe, or something more stale, filled the air. As I rounded the front of the train, I saw the station beyond. The platform was visible now, still and empty at first glance. Emergency signs glowed faintly from battery units, casting weak, bluish light across tiled walls and stairwells. It was not much, but it was more than the total darkness in the tunnel. I felt a flicker of relief. Emergency lighting meant the batteries were still good. There might be people there. There might be a working radio at the station agent's booth. The relief lasted about 2 seconds. As my headlamp beam crossed the platform, I saw figures standing in the shadows, a dozen at least, some near the platform edge, some near the stairs, some clustered in the center. They were upright but motionless, like they had stopped mid-step and forgotten what they were doing. When my beam hit them, several heads turned at once, faces angling toward the light. None of them called out for help. None of them waved. They simply turned and stared. I lowered the beam immediately, pointing it at the water near my feet. The movement on the platform changed. Some of the figures began to move in my direction, not quickly at first, but steadily. Their footsteps splashed as they reached the water at the edge of the platform. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I took a slow breath and forced myself to think. Bright light was attracting them. Noise might attract them. I needed to get from here to somewhere safe without turning myself into a target. On the wall near the platform entrance, I knew there was a door labeled Staff Only, leading to a corridor with a small maintenance room and a vertical shaft. At the base of that shaft, there should be a ladder to a surface building that housed ventilation equipment. I had been there years ago during inspections. It was not part of my regular route, but I remembered the layout. If I could reach that door and get it unlocked, I might find a way up and out, or at least into a secured space. But first, I had to get past the platform without drawing an entire crowd of infected people onto myself. I took another breath, switched off my headlamp, and was swallowed by darkness. In that moment, the only light came from the emergency signage. Dim blue and green rectangles floated in the black, marking exits and stairways. The shapes of people on the platform became vague shadows, moving slowly. The sound of water was louder now as it filled the space between the train and the platform. I pressed my left hand against the tunnel wall to keep my orientation and moved forward along the maintenance walkway. Every step was careful and measured. One wrong placement and I could slip into the track area, where debris and uneven surfaces waited. Behind me, inside the train, the pounding on the windows continued. Ahead of me, soft splashes and irregular footsteps echoed as the infected passengers moved. Without direct light, it was hard to judge distances. I counted steps in my head to keep track. At the point where the train met the platform, the clearance between the car body and the wall narrowed. The maintenance walkway ended at the front of the train. To continue, I would have to step into the track bed, climb up to the platform, and cross it. I paused, crouched, and turned the headlamp on at its lowest brightness setting, pointing it straight down at my boots. My immediate surroundings became visible in a faint halo: the edge of the slab, the running rail, the third rail with its protective cover, and the edge of the platform ahead. At least one good thing about the blackout: the third rail was dead. There were no indicator lights, and the hum I always felt through my boots near energized sections was absent. We were not supposed to step in the track bed without verified lockout, but the choice now was between breaking procedure or staying pinned between a rising flood and people infected with an unknown virus. I stepped down into the water. It rose to mid-shin. The temperature cut through my boots, sharp and cold. I felt my way forward with my toes until I reached the platform edge. I crouched low, grabbed the lip with my hands, and pulled myself up, keeping my head down below the platform surface as much as possible. Voices echoed above me, low sounds, irregular. A foot came down close to my hand, splashing water. I froze, holding my breath. The foot stepped away. Any sudden light or loud movement would bring them right on top of me. I had to move slowly and keep my profile low, using what little emergency light remained to navigate. I eased up just enough to peer over the edge. The platform stretched left and right. The nearest group of infected stood about 5 meters away, near a set of stairs leading up to the mezzanine. They swayed gently, as if their balance was off. One of them wore a business suit soaked to mid-leg, tie hanging loose. Another wore a hoodie with the hood half torn. Their faces were turned away, unfocused. I slid onto the platform, staying in a crouch, and began to move sideways along the edge. My boots made minimal sound on the wet tiles, but every little squeak sounded too loud to my ears. Halfway to the staff-only door, one of the infected turned its head in my direction. Its eyes seemed to pick up something, maybe the faint reflection of light off my helmet, or a small sound. It stiffened, lips parting. It let out a sound that was not quite a shout. It was a long, drawn-out moan that rose and echoed off the tiled walls. The others reacted instantly, heads turned, bodies shifted. I had no time to stay quiet now. I stood and sprinted the remaining distance to the door. Hands reached toward me from the side. Someone in a soaked dress lunged. I twisted past, feeling fingers scrape my sleeve. Another person moved in from the right, arms out. I dropped my shoulder and pushed through, using my momentum and the weight of my tool bag like a battering ram. I reached the staff-only door, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It did not move. It was locked from the other side. I swore under my breath and dug into my shirt pocket for my key ring. The infected were close now. I heard wet footsteps and irregular breathing behind me. I fumbled with the keys, the metal clicking together in my hand. The lock was an older cylindrical type with a standard company profile. I found the right key by shape, jammed it into the cylinder, and turned. The lock clicked. I yanked the door open, stepped through, and slammed it behind me. Hands hit the metal panel a moment later, followed by the dull thuds of bodies. The door shuddered in its frame but held. It was solid steel on a reinforced frame meant to block casual entry, not a serious assault, but it bought me time. The corridor on the other side was narrow and unlit. I flicked my headlamp to a higher setting. Pipes ran along the ceiling. The floor sloped upward toward the ventilation shaft room. Somewhere above me, the city was without power, and a virus was turning people into something barely recognizable. I took a breath to steady myself. The pounding on the door continued but started to weaken. Either they were losing interest or their muscles were tiring. I was not sure how this virus affected endurance or pain response, and I did not want to find out by staying still. I moved down the corridor. The maintenance room halfway down held spare filters, tools, and a wall-mounted phone connected to an internal line. I tried it on instinct. The phone was dead. No dial tone. Whatever had taken down power had also taken down the phone exchange serving this area. My radio remained silent on every channel I tried. Either the repeaters had lost power, or higher-level systems had been deliberately shut down. At the end of the corridor, a steel ladder climbed up through a vertical shaft. This shaft connected the tunnel level to a surface ventilation building. I pointed my headlamp up. The ladder disappeared into darkness. Normally, the shaft would have some low-level lighting, but tonight it was just concrete and steel. The water level in the corridor was only a few centimeters deep here, much lower than in the main tunnel. The grading of the system meant that if I stayed in this side corridor, I would delay the rising water for a while. But if the pumps failed for long enough, even this place would not stay dry. I started climbing. The ladder rungs were cold and slightly slippery, but my gloves gave me enough grip. I counted rungs out of habit. 20, 40, 60. At around 70 rungs, my arms started to burn. I paused on a small intermediate rest platform, caught my breath, and looked down. My headlamp beam revealed only the first few meters of ladder and then darkness. At the top of the shaft, another steel hatch waited. I tested the handle. It did not move. There was a mechanical lock, but from this side there was only an emergency release handle. I pulled it. The hatch moved a fraction of an inch and then stopped, blocked by something on the other side. I pressed my shoulder against it and pushed. It did not budge. Either debris had fallen on it, or someone had locked it from above, or the building above had suffered some structural damage. For a moment, hanging there on the ladder in the dark shaft, the reality of my situation pressed in all at once. Power was out. Water was rising. The tunnel behind me was full of infected people. This emergency route was blocked. My escape plan had just hit a solid, immovable lid. I forced myself not to panic. Panic gets people hurt in confined spaces. I had seen that in training videos and in person over the years. The key was to think in steps. Step 1. Get back down to a more secure place before my arms failed. Step 2. Reassess options. I climbed down to the rest platform, then all the way back down the shaft to the corridor. The pounding on the staff-only door had stopped. Either the infected had lost interest or something else had drawn them away. The emergency lighting battery units in the station only had a few hours of life. Once they failed, the whole place would be as dark as the tunnel. I checked my headlamp again. The battery indicator still showed about 3/4 charge. That gave me some comfort. The lamp was my lifeline now. Without it, I would be blind in a maze filled with water and infected people. My options narrowed themselves. The blocked hatch meant I could not go up here. The station level was compromised by dozens of infected people. The main tunnel was filling. Somewhere, there had to be another route. A cross passage to another tunnel, a higher-level maintenance gallery, or a pump control room with heavier floodgates. I pulled the rolled-up schematic from my bag and spread it on the corridor wall, holding it flat with one hand while my headlamp lit it. The drawing was old, with faded lines and smudged notes, but the essential elements were clear. The main running tunnels, the sump chambers, the cross passages, and the ventilation structures. I traced my position with a gloved finger. I was in a side corridor parallel to the main station. Above me was the blocked ventilation shaft. Further ahead, past the station in the direction of Brooklyn, there was a cross passage labeled X-Pass 3, leading to an older freight tunnel. That freight tunnel sat slightly higher and ran to a larger pump station with manual floodgates and a small operations room. If I could reach Cross Passage 3, I might have a route to that pump station. There, even in a blackout, the manual gates could slow the flooding. There might also be old emergency radios or battery systems independent of the main grid. The problem: to reach Cross Passage 3, I would have to move back toward the main tunnel beyond the station. That meant getting past infected people again, this time with less emergency light and more water. I folded the schematic and slid it back into my bag. Standing in that narrow corridor, with the tunnel roaring below and the overhead hatch jammed, I realized there was no path that did not involve risk. There was only the path where I knew the layout well enough to have a chance. I walked back to the staff-only door and pressed my ear against it. The metal was cool. No vibration, no pounding. I opened it a crack, headlamp off, and peered through the narrow gap. The station looked dimmer now. The emergency lights were weaker, their batteries draining. The platform was still flooded to ankle depth near the edge. I saw a few figures scattered, standing or leaning against pillars, but far fewer than before. Most were facing away, staring into nothing. I did not see any clusters near the door. I slipped through, closed the door softly, and kept low, moving along the platform edge in the opposite direction from where I had come earlier. I kept my headlamp off and relied on the faint glow from the exit signs. My boots made small ripples in the water. One of the infected nearby shifted and half-turned, as if sensing me. I froze, barely breathing. Its eyes passed over me without focus. After a few seconds, it turned back toward the dark tunnels, drawn by some distant sound I could not hear. I moved on. At the far end of the platform, the track disappeared into the tunnel again. Above the tunnel mouth, a small maintenance access sign pointed toward a side door. That door led to a narrow passage running alongside the running tunnels. Halfway down that passage, a stairwell descended to cross passage 3. I reached the door, tried the handle, and found it unlocked. Inside, the passage was completely dark. I switched my headlamp back on at low power, just enough to see the next few meters. The maintenance passage was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass side by side. Cable conduits ran along one wall. The floor sloped gently downward. The air was cooler here, with a faint metallic taste. I moved quickly now. Every minute that passed meant more water entering the system. If the levels in the main tunnel rose too high, the cross passages would become conduits for water, turning narrow corridors into fast-moving streams. After about 50 meters, I reached the stairwell down to cross passage 3. The stairs went down sharply, and I could already hear the distant sound of water. Not just trickling, but a steady roar like a small waterfall. At the bottom of the stairs, the cross passage opened onto the main running tunnel again. The sight that met me there made me stop for a second. The tunnel was a river. Water filled it almost to the height of the maintenance walkway, which was now submerged in places. Debris floated past. Plastic bottles, loose cables, pieces of wood from somewhere I could not see. The water moved with clear direction, flowing from the station area toward the deeper sump sections. Across the torrent, on the opposite side of the tunnel, was the entrance to the older freight tunnel. A heavy steel door sat in a slightly recessed alcove. It was my target. Between me and it, water rushed fast enough to knock a person off their feet. I shone my headlamp along the walls, looking for anything that might help. There were handholds here and there, maintenance brackets, and a few utility pipes running just above the waterline, but nothing like a safe bridge. I scanned the tunnel again and caught movement up ahead. A partially submerged shape bobbed in the water near the curve. The body of a person, face down. It turned slowly in the current, arms floating. I looked away quickly and forced myself to focus on the door I needed to reach. I did not have the luxury of standing still and hoping the water would recede. Without pumps, it would only rise higher. I climbed down the stairs to the edge of the cross passage, feeling the concrete under my boots. The water lapped at the last step. I looked at the opposite side and mentally measured both distance and flow speed. I had done emergency response training that included moving through water, but nothing like this. Still, training had given me some basics. Keep your body angled upstream. Use handholds. Avoid turning your back to the flow, and never underestimate what moving water can do. I spotted a steel conduit running along the wall just above the water line. It continued across to the other side, forming a kind of handrail, though it was not designed for that. If I held onto it and moved sideways, I might be able to cross without losing my footing completely. I took a breath, clipped my tool bag to a chest strap so it would not slip off, and tested the first step into the flow. The water was icy and pushed hard against my legs. It wanted to take my feet out from under me. I widened my stance, braced, and grabbed the conduit with my left hand. My right hand stayed free to grab other holds. I moved slowly, inch by inch. The water pulled at my boots, trying to twist my body downstream. My gloves squeaked on the metal pipe. Every step had to find solid contact with the concrete underneath. Whenever my foot slid on an unseen object, my heart jerked. Halfway across, something bumped against my legs under the surface. I could not see what it was. Instinct made me jerk away, and for a moment one foot lost contact with the floor. The current grabbed me, twisting my body. My grip on the conduit held, but pain shot through my shoulder as my weight swung. I bit down on a groan and pulled myself back toward the wall. I set my feet again and resumed the sideways motion, more cautious now. By the time I reached the opposite side, my legs were shaking, and my hands felt numb inside the gloves. I hauled myself up onto the narrow lip of concrete next to the freight door, leaned against the wall, catching my breath. The freight tunnel door was old and heavy, with a manual latch mechanism. It had been a long time since anyone used it regularly. Rust marked the hinges. A faded stencil named it Freight Access East 2. I lifted the latch, expecting resistance, but it moved surprisingly easily. Either maintenance had kept it lubricated by schedule or someone had used it more recently than I thought. The door opened inward with a low creak. Cool, dry air washed over me from the darkness beyond. I stepped through and closed the door behind me, engaging the latch. The roar of the flooded tunnel dulled to a steady background rumble. The freight tunnel beyond was narrower and older than the main passenger tunnel. Brickwork showed through where concrete had spalled away. The floor was higher and no water was yet visible. Rails for small maintenance carts ran down the center. My headlamp beam picked out graffiti on the walls, old warehouse codes, and more recent markings from maintenance crews. The air smelled of dust and oil instead of river water. I knew the pump station lay about 300 meters down this tunnel. I set off at a fast walk, the echo of my steps bouncing back from the curved walls. Every so often I checked behind me, half expecting one of the infected to have followed through some unseen route, but I was alone. Alone, except for the sound of the city's lungs failing in slow motion. The freight tunnel ended at a large steel door with multiple locking bars. This was the entrance to the pump station and operations room. Signs warned of authorized personnel only. I had been inside twice during special inspections. I disengaged the locking bars and pushed. The door swung open on well-maintained hinges. Inside, the pump station stretched like a concrete cavern. Multiple vertical shafts descended to sumps below. Huge centrifugal pumps lined the edges, connected to thick discharge pipes running up toward the surface. Control panels stood along one wall, covered in indicator lights and analog gauges. Every indicator light was dark. Every gauge sat at 0. The usual roar of machinery and rush of water was absent. The station was silent, aside from the distant echo of water somewhere deep below. I walked to the control panel for the manual floodgates. Each gate controlled a section of the tunnel network, allowing operators to isolate a flooded section and protect others. Some gates were automated, but in this station they had manual overrides. Large handwheels connected by mechanical linkages to the gate actuators. On the wall, a schematic showed which gates corresponded to which tunnels. I traced the line from the section under the river toward the city and the section extending deeper into Brooklyn. If I closed Gate R3, I could limit the flow of water from the riverside into the rest of the network. It would not remove water already present, but it would slow the spread. Operating the gate by hand would be hard work. The mechanical advantage of the handwheel helped, but the gate was massive. Normally, we would not do this without checking with control. Tonight, there was no one to ask. I took off my gloves, flexed my fingers, then put them back on to improve grip, and started turning the handwheel for Gate R3. At first, it resisted. Years of not being used had left a film of corrosion inside the mechanism. I leaned my weight into it, grunting. Slowly, the wheel began to move. A mechanical indicator nearby shifted from open toward closing. As I worked, a thought crossed my mind that had nothing to do with water or gates. Somewhere above ground, the virus was spreading. Power was out citywide. That blackout might be deliberate, an emergency attempt to slow something. Or it might be a side effect of chaos. Either way, the tunnels where I had spent half my working life were becoming traps. The handwheel reached the closed mark. I let go, breathing hard. The muscles in my shoulders and back burned. For a moment, I heard nothing but my own breathing. Then, from deep below, a change in the water sound reached my ears. The roar shifted pitch, slightly lower, as if the flow had decreased. The gate had moved. It was working. I checked other gates on the schematic. If I left them all open, water would still find paths into other lines. I worked the wheels for 2 more gates that fed into lower-lying branches. Each one demanded more of my strength. By the time I finished, sweat soaked my shirt under the coveralls despite the cool air. When I stepped back, the board showed 3 gates closed and others still open. It was not perfect, but it was the best I could do alone. Now came the other half of the pump station, the power and pump controls. A separate mechanical panel controlled a diesel generator array. In the event of a grid failure, this station could, in theory, start its own generator and power at least 1 or 2 pumps and some lights. It was not meant to run indefinitely, but it was enough to keep water at bay during outages. The start procedure was printed on a metal plate next to the control levers. I read it out loud to myself to make sure I followed every step. Step 1. Verify main power breaker open. Step 2. Check fuel level. Step 3. Check oil level. Step 4. Set generator control to manual. Step 5. Engage starter. I went to the fuel indicator. The gauge was analog, with a needle showing the tank level. It pointed to around 60%. That was good news. If the maintenance schedule had been followed, the diesel in the tank would be treated to prevent growth of anything that could clog filters. I opened the small inspection panel on the generator and checked the oil dipstick. The level was within range. There were no obvious leaks. Someone had done their job recently. I moved to the main power breaker. It was already in the open position, meaning there was no connection to the dead grid. That was what I needed before starting the generator so that I would not backfeed a deadline or damage equipment. I set the control mode to manual and placed my hand on the starter switch. It was not a key but a guarded toggle with a spring-loaded start position. "Here goes," I said under my breath. Talking to myself had become a habit now, a way to keep focused. I flipped the switch to start. Nothing happened for a second. Then, somewhere deep in the generator housing, I heard the whine of an electric starter motor spooling up. A moment later, the heavy thump of cylinders firing came, uneven at first, then smoothing out into a steady rumble. The whole floor vibrated under my boots. Indicator gauges on the panel came to life. Oil pressure climbed. Voltage output rose toward nominal. The low-voltage distribution panel lights flickered on one by one. I smiled for the first time that night. It was a small victory, but it meant I could do more than just close gates. I could move water. I engaged the pump controls for Group A, which was dedicated to the section feeding the tunnel under the river. I opened the discharge valve gradually to avoid water hammer, then watched the flow indicator climb. The sound in the sump shafts changed again, becoming a full-throated rush as the pump began lifting water toward the surface outfalls. The station lights came on at reduced power. Bare bulbs overhead glowed a soft yellow. Shadows retreated from corners. The concrete walls and steel structures looked less like a tomb and more like a machine room again. In that brighter light, the place also felt less safe in another way. Brightness could draw attention. If any infected people had found another route into this level, the sudden noise and light could pull them here. I took my radio and tried again. "Control, this is Maintenance Technician Alvarez at Pump Station East 2. Emergency generator is online. Gates R3, R4, and B1 are closed, and pump group A is running. Is anyone receiving this?" A long pause followed. Just when I was about to give up, a burst of static came through, followed by a voice faint and distorted. "Varez. Copy. Say again. Location." My chest tightened with relief. "This is Alvarez at Pump Station East 2, freight tunnel access from the river section. I have manual control of gates and local pumps. The main grid is down. What is your status?" Static hissed. The generator's vibration made the radio casing buzz in my hand. Then the voice came again, a little clearer. "Control center compromised, partial evacuation, some staff remaining at backup site. Citywide power failure confirmed. Large-scale, civil disturbance. Advise extreme caution. Can you hold your position?" "Compromised how?" I asked, even though I already suspected. There was a long silence, then, "Infected. Attacked main control. Some staff not responsive, we sealed sections. We have limited access to system. Your station is on manual. Prioritize life safety and flood control. Do not attempt surface exit through main buildings unless clear." "Infected are already in the station near the river," I said. "Passengers. They appear attracted to light and sound. I closed several gates to slow water spread and started Group A pumps. How long until fuel runs out for this generator?" Another pause then. "At standard load, estimated 8 hours. If you rotate pumps, maybe longer. Do not run everything at full draw. Keep one group at a time if possible." I looked at the row of pumps and the fuel gauge. 8 hours was not much in the scale of a whole city, but it was something. "What about rescue?" I asked. "Is anyone coming down here?" Static, then an answer that was honest and not comforting. "Surface situation unstable, multiple incidents. We are coordinating with emergency services, but resources are limited. For now, safest place may be secured underground areas away from large groups of infected. Do not expect immediate evacuation." In other words, I was on my own. "Understood," I said. "I will manage gates and pumps as long as I can." "Copy, Alvarez," the voice said. "Stay safe. Control out." The transmission ended. I tried to reach Greg, but there was no answer on the maintenance channel. I wondered if he had made it to the electrical room in time, if he had found an escape route, or if he was trapped somewhere with no light and rising water. I could not dwell on it. People who freeze in emergencies create second emergencies. I had work to do. For the next hour, my life condensed into a rotation of tasks. I walked to the pump station, checking for leaks, monitoring the gauges, adjusting valves to refine flow. I checked the fuel level in the generator, calculating how long I could run the current configuration. I closed one more gate feeding a low-lying spur that rarely saw traffic. Every action had a purpose. Keep as much of the tunnel network dry as possible for as long as possible. As time passed, the roar of water from the riverside diminished. The pump draw stabilized. I imagined the flooded tunnel outside where water levels were now dropping slowly instead of rising. Any infected people who had wandered into the deeper sections would find themselves standing in moving currents. Occasionally, I would turn off a pump for a few minutes to conserve fuel, watching to see how quickly the sumps filled. I established a rhythm. Run Group A at full capacity for 30 minutes, reduce for 10, then bring it back up. The generator load meter responded smoothly. Between tasks, when I allowed my thoughts to drift, images came uninvited. The eyes of the person in the driver's cab, the way the people on the platform moved, the blocked hatch in the ventilation shaft. The city above was changing while I moved valves and switches below. About 90 minutes after I started the generator, a new sound reached the pump station from the freight tunnel entrance. It was faint at first, almost masked by the engine rumble and water rush. A muffled thud, then another, then voices. Not the low, aimless sounds of infected people, but urgent human voices. I killed the generator for a few seconds, both to conserve fuel and to listen. The lights flickered and went out, leaving only my headlamp, but the sudden quiet allowed sounds from the tunnel to carry clearly. "Someone in there?" a voice shouted. Male, mid-range, with a strained edge. Another voice answered closer. "I see light. There's light under the door." I grabbed my adjustable wrench, not as a weapon, but as something solid in my hand, and moved toward the freight entrance. My headlamp beam illuminated the heavy steel door and the floor around it. "Who is it?" I called. "Transit police," a voice answered. "We have 2 officers and 3 civilians. We are unarmed now. We had to leave our main gear behind. We are in the freight tunnel. The water is rising on this side. Can you let us in?" "Are any of you injured?" I asked. "Anyone showing signs of infection? Loss of control?" There was a short pause, then, "One minor leg injury from fall. No signs of infection. We have been watching each other closely since we got down here." Their answers sounded quick and practiced, like they had been asking themselves the same questions repeatedly. I thought fast. More people meant more mouths, more bodies to move, more chances for something to go wrong. But it also meant more eyes, more hands, and maybe more ways to survive. If they really were transit police and survivors, shutting them out would mean condemning them to eventual drowning or infection. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The group stood just outside in the freight tunnel. 2 men in dark transit police uniforms were in front, both soaked to the waist. One had a bandage wrapped around his left forearm. Behind them was a woman in paramedic gear, a young man in a hoodie, and an older man in a business shirt and slacks holding a small backpack. Their faces showed the same mix of exhaustion and tension I felt. The officer in front had a name badge that read R. Patel. He looked at me, at the pump station behind me, then back. "You are maintenance?" "Yeah," I said. "Miguel Alvarez, track and tunnel maintenance. Come in quickly before we get company." They filed in. I closed and locked the door behind them. For a few seconds, everyone just stood there, catching their breath, dripping water onto the concrete floor. I turned the generator back on. The engine rattled to life again. Lights came up slowly, making everyone squint. "Thank you," the paramedic said. She had short hair tucked under a soaked cap and a patch that read S. Morales. "You may have just saved our lives." "What happened on your side?" I asked. R. Patel rubbed his forehead with the back of his hand. Short version: power went out. Train stopped between stations. We responded to reports of disturbances on one train and found multiple infected people attacking others. We tried to get passengers off, but the virus moves faster than any of us expected. Within minutes, half the people on that platform were not themselves anymore. "We fell back," the older man said quietly. "I was stuck on that train. I saw people change right in front of me. They were just scared one moment, and then they were different. No fear, no hesitation." He stopped, staring at the floor. "We tried to move people through a different exit," Morales continued, "but crowd panic is its own danger. We heard someone mention a freight tunnel access. One of the officers knew this route and led us here. We lost a few on the way. Some fell, some stayed behind to hold doors." "Have you been in contact with control?" I asked. "We had some radio contact with the backup center," Patel said. "They told us almost the same thing you probably heard. Citywide failure, infected people everywhere, emergency services overwhelmed. They said underground structures with controlled access might be safer than trying to reach open streets right now." "That is what they told me too," I said. The younger man in the hoodie spoke for the first time. "So, we are just going to hide underground while the city goes crazy up there." "We are going to stay alive," Patel said firmly. "That is our job tonight. We help who we can, and we do not take unnecessary risks." "Staying alive right now means keeping this place from flooding," I said. "If we lose these pumps and gates, a lot of tunnels will fill. Anyone trapped down there will not have a chance." Patel looked around at the machinery, the gates, and the schematics on the wall. "Then we help you keep it running." For the next few hours, the pump station became a small island of order in a chaotic system. We divided tasks by skills. I showed Patel and the older man, who introduced himself as David Chen, a structural engineer visiting a project in the city, how to monitor gate positions and read the analog gauges. Morales checked the injured officer's leg and dressed the wound properly with supplies from her kit. The young man, whose name was Leo, helped me cycle pumps and check the generator fuel level at regular intervals. We established a simple rule about infection. Everyone watched everyone else. If anyone showed signs of loss of control, sudden aggression, or other symptoms, we would separate that person into a locked side room. It was a harsh rule, but it was necessary. Between tasks, we exchanged fragments of information. Patel described how quickly Control had lost oversight of the system. When infected people breached the main control center, staff had initiated partial lockdown, shutting doors and isolating sections. Some staff had been evacuated to a backup site on higher ground. Others were still inside, status unknown. David explained his presence underground. He had been reviewing tunnel reinforcement plans related to long-term flooding risks. Ironically, his specialty included exactly what we were now experiencing, except this scenario involved infected people and a citywide power loss on top of the water problem. Morales spoke of her ambulance work. Calls had skyrocketed over the past week. At first, they responded as if it were any outbreak, but then people started attacking paramedics and ambulances, sometimes turning on their own families mid-transport. They had implemented new protocols overnight. It was not enough. Leo had the least context. He was a college student who had been on a late train heading home from a night class. He had been listening to music when passengers started shouting. He pulled out his earbuds and saw people fighting, then realized they were not just fighting. He had followed the transit police when they shouted for anyone still in control to move with them. Hearing their stories made the virus feel real in a way that distant news never had. It was not just something on a screen. It was in the same stations, on the same platforms, in the same cars I walked past every night. Every hour or so, I checked in with the backup control site by radio. The signal was weak and sometimes dropped entirely, but we managed to exchange basic information. They confirmed that the blackout was being addressed, but restoring full power was complicated by safety concerns. Bringing high-voltage lines back up in a city with uncontrolled fires, damaged substations, and infected people roaming near critical infrastructure was not as simple as flipping a switch. They also confirmed that emergency services were focusing on hospitals, shelters, and key public buildings. Tunnels were not a priority unless there was a way to evacuate large groups safely. At one point, I asked about Greg. I gave them his name, his unit, and his usual patrol area. They promised to check any reports they had, but did not call back with an answer. Time blurred into a sequence of small tasks and short conversations. The pump station lights hummed softly. The generator kept up a constant low thunder. The air grew warmer from the engine's heat. As the hours passed, fatigue crept in. Leo fell asleep sitting against a wall, his head tilted at an awkward angle. Morales dozed in a chair, her arms crossed, but woke quickly whenever someone moved near the injured officer, whose name was Davis. David Chen sat at the gate control panel, staring at the indicator lights as if willing them to stay stable. I busied myself with readings. Doing something kept my mind away from wandering down mental paths leading to panic. Around what I guessed was 4 in the morning, based on my wristwatch and the timeline since the blackout, the backup control voice returned with an update. "Alvarez, this is backup control. We have partial power restoration in some sectors. The street lights are still mostly out, but a few substations are online. Flood reports from multiple tunnels. Your station is one of the few with active control. You are making a difference." "Do you have any updates on infection spread?" I asked. The voice hesitated. "Confirmed cases in all boroughs. Surface travel is limited. Authorities recommend people stay inside and away from crowds. There are unconfirmed reports of infected individuals still moving after injuries that would normally incapacitate them. Avoid direct contact at all costs." I thought of the person in the driver's cab slamming their hands against the glass. Understood. "If your generator fuel runs low, you may need to prioritize which sections to protect," the voice continued. "We will send revised priority maps if our systems allow. For now, do what you judge best." The radio clicked off. I looked at the fuel gauge again. It was now at around 30%. We had maybe 4 hours left at our current load. I gathered the others near the schematic board. "Fuel is dropping," I said. "We cannot run all pumps at this level forever. We need to decide which sectors to prioritize if we have to cut back." David moved closer, adjusting his glasses. "Which lines are lowest?" I pointed to the schematic. "The river sections are the lowest, plus some older tunnels towards the south. We already closed gates to isolate a few low-usage branches. If we let the deeper under-river sections fill more and focus on keeping the higher ones dry, we protect more access routes and emergency exits." "What about people trapped in those deeper sections?" Morales asked quietly. "If there are still people down there, they're either fighting water or infection or both," I said. Saying it hurt, but it was true. Right now, our actions can protect dozens of kilometers of track from flood damage. That means more paths for rescue teams later. Patel nodded slowly. "We cannot save everyone. We focus on what saves the most lives long term." Leo, who had woken up and was listening, clenched his jaw. "So we are just going to let some tunnels fill and hope whoever is there found a way out." "We are going to slow the flood everywhere we can," I said. "But if fuel runs out, the pumps stop no matter what we choose. Our choices now buy time and options. That is the best we have." He looked away, lips pressed together, but did not argue further. We adjusted the pump schedule. I reduced Group A's runtime and shifted some capacity to Group C, which served higher-lying lines closer to hospitals and emergency shelters according to the limited map notes. We closed one more gate leading to a low-traffic maintenance spur. Each decision felt like drawing a line on a map between survival and loss. Around what my watch said was 5:30 in the morning. Tiny changes in the pump station's ambient noise signaled something new. The lights flickered, not like when the generator groaned under load, but in a different pattern. A brief brightening, then a return to normal. I checked the panels. Some of the indicator lights associated with grid power flickered faintly. The mainline voltage indicator moved slightly off zero, then dropped again. "Grid is trying to come back," David said, watching the needle. "They're testing sections." Patel looked up at the concrete ceiling as if he could see the power lines above. "What happens if they bring power back while we are running the generator?" "We keep the main breaker open and do not connect them directly," I said. "We wait until the grid is stable, then do a controlled transfer. If we rush it, we could damage equipment or cause surges. He nodded. You handle that part. We will keep watch. Minutes later, the indicator needle rose again, this time more steadily. The grid voltage reached nominal and stayed there. The line frequency stabilized. I kept the main breaker open for a full 10 minutes, watching the readings. Only when I was sure the feed was stable did I begin the transfer procedure. I reduced the generator load gradually by shutting down pumps in stages. Then I opened the generator output breaker, let it idle, and slowly closed the main grid breaker. The station lights flickered once and then settled. The hum of distant transformers replaced some of the generator's rumble in the background soundscape. We had power from above again. I shut down the generator, letting it cool zone, and checked the fuel gauge. We had used most of the tank, but still had enough for another short run later if the grid failed again. For the first time since the blackout, the pump station was connected to the larger system again. We could now run more pumps without worrying as much about fuel. We could circulate water through more sections, clearing out areas that had taken on partial flooding. I announced it to the group. Grid power is back here. Pumps will be more stable now. David exhaled slowly. That is one piece of good news. Patel gave a small smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Now, we just have to worry about everything else. Everything else, the infected on the platforms, the blocked ventilation shafts, the city above us adjusting to a virus that turned crowded spaces into threats. Control soon confirmed the power restoration. They also warned that it was not universal. Some substations remained offline due to damage, and some areas were deliberately kept dark to keep crowds dispersed. They still advised extreme caution about surface travel. Where does that leave us? Leo asked, leaning against a pump casing. Alive, with a functioning pump station, in a city that is still figuring out how to survive a virus, I said. We have water under partial control here. We know these tunnels better than most people. That is something. Morales looked at me thoughtfully. You realize this place is now one of the safest spots in this part of the network. Solid doors, working pumps, power, and a small group of people who are still thinking clearly. It is also underground, Leo said. And the virus is up there. Should we not try to get to the surface? Not yet, Patel said. If we go up without a clear plan, we could walk straight into a crowd of infected people or into a street fight between groups we do not understand. Here, we can monitor, listen to control, and wait for a window when moving is safer. I agreed. There are surface access points connected to this station, but some are inside fenced utility yards. Those might be calmer than street-level exits and stations. When Control has a better picture, they can advise which exit is least risky. Control, when asked, supported that plan. Stay below for now if your location is secure. We will update you when certain surface zones are safer. There are reports of some neighborhoods organizing their own safety perimeters, but others are chaotic. So we stayed. As the morning progressed, sunlight that we could not see warmed the city above, but down in the pump station, time was marked only by my watch and the shift in Control's radio reports. They spoke of improvised roadblocks, of hospitals overflowing, of some infected people moving faster than expected, of others losing mobility but still reacting strongly to noise and light. They mentioned that the virus seemed to spread through direct contact with saliva or other fluids, often through bites and close exposure. Protective gear reduced risk, but not completely. There was still no treatment. Hearing that made me glad for every layer of clothing between my skin and the environment. At one point, in a lull between tasks, Leo approached me while I checked a flow meter. Do you really think we can stay down here for days if we have to? He asked. We have water, power, and some food from the emergency stocks in the back room," I said. "We do not have a lot of food, but we can stretch it if we ration it. The main question is air and security. As long as the ventilation system stays functional and we keep doors sealed, this place is safer than many others." "And after that," he pressed. "After that," I said, "we will move when we have enough information to not just walk blind. Through these tunnels there are connections to other stations, maintenance galleries, even some old civil defense shelters. We can plan a route." He nodded slowly. "You really know this place." I shrugged. "This is my job. Most people ride trains and never think about what is behind the walls. We are the ones who go through those doors. We see where the wires and water go. Tonight, that matters." He looked around the pump station, at the gates and pumps and panels. "I always thought the subway was just trains and platforms. I never imagined all this." "Most people do not," I said. "If they did, they might respect it a little more." Later, while David and Patel discussed which sections of the network might serve as safe corridors for future movement, I took a moment to myself on a metal stair leading to the upper platform of the pump station. I turned off my headlamp and sat in the dim light from the overheads, listening. The pumps ran steadily now, their vibration passing through the concrete like a heartbeat. The air smelled of diesel residue, damp metal, and the faint scent of human presence. Somewhere beyond the station walls, infected people moved through dark tunnels and stairwells, some wading through water that was now slowly receding because of the machinery we were operating. I thought about Greg again, about the people on the train, about the passengers on the platform who had turned their heads toward my light. Their faces floated in my mind, pale and unfocused. I had survived the blackout and the flooded tunnel not because I was braver than anyone else, but because my work had forced me to learn these systems in detail. Every ladder, every gate, every bypass. I had always thought of that knowledge as just technical expertise. Tonight, it had become something more. It had become a survival map. The tunnel network was not just infrastructure now. It was a second city under the city, one that could hide us from the violence above and the infection in crowded streets. It had its own rules, its own dangers, but also its own pathways. I knew then that my role in whatever came next would not end when the water levels stabilized. As long as this virus moved through crowded places, the underground network would be both a threat and an opportunity. People would need safe routes. They would need someone who knew how to keep the water and power under control. They would need someone who could walk in the dark with a failing headlamp and still know where to put each step. I stood, switched my headlamp back on, and went down to the control panel again. Leo was there, watching one of the gauges. Morales was checking supplies. Patel and David were tracing lines on the schematic with their fingers. "Status?" I asked. "Gate position stable," David said. "Flood levels in the higher lines are dropping slowly. The under-river sections you closed off are holding water, but that is expected." "Control says some surface areas are quieter now," Patel added. They suggested that by late afternoon, some utility yards connected to us might be safe enough for a controlled exit. No promises, though. "We have time to plan," I said. "We can choose a yard that links to a facility with good sight lines and solid fences. If the yard is clear, we can get a look at the city and decide our next move." "And if it is not clear?" Leo asked. "Then we come back down," I said. "The tunnels will still be here. The pumps will keep running as long as the power holds. Underground, we have options." He looked at the panel, the pumps, the gates. "You say that like you actually trust this place." I thought about it for a second. "I trust what I know. I know these tunnels. I know these machines. I know how water moves through them. I do not know what the virus will do next. So I stand where I have the most knowledge. He nodded slowly. I guess that makes sense. When the blackout had hit, I had been just another maintenance guy doing his nightly rounds. By the time the city's power started to flicker back, I was something else. A person with a headlamp and a set of keys standing between a flood and the people who still needed a dry path. I did not know what the next day would bring. I did not know how far the virus would spread or how much of the city would wake up from this nightmare. But I knew this much. I had survived the blackout trapped inside a flooded metro tunnel because I understood the system that everyone else took for granted. For now, that was enough. Alvarez, Patel said, drawing my attention back to the schematic. Control sent updated maps. They marked a utility yard near here as a possible exit in a few hours. You up for leading the way when the time comes? I looked at the lines, at the tunnels connecting our pump station to that yard. I traced the route in my head, counting doors and ladders, picturing possible choke points where infected might linger. Yeah, I said. When we go, I will take point. I know the path. And your headlamp? Leo asked, half teasing, half serious. I reached up and tapped the battery pack lightly. It is still holding. Besides, we have backup lamps and battery packs here. We will not move without having enough light for everyone. He managed a small smile. Good, because I am not walking through those tunnels blind. None of us are, Morales said. We stick together. We went back to our tasks, each of us focused on a different part of the system. Pumps hummed, water moved. Somewhere above, the city changed pace in ways we would not see until we stepped out again. In the meantime, deep under concrete and steel, surrounded by machinery and echoing halls, we kept the dark from filling up entirely. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.